The first snow of December came heavy and low, draping the valley in a silence that swallowed sound. Each flake glowed faintly against the dimming sky, and by dusk, the world looked carved from ice and smoke. On the ridge above, Elias Greyhawk worked bare to the waist, breath steaming in the cold. His white hair hung damp down his back as he split a log clean through with a single strike. The sound cracked across the frozen air like thunder, before fading into stillness again. The cabin behind him glowed faintly from within, its chimney coughing out threads of wood smoke that curled into the pale sky. He had been alone long enough that silence no longer pressed, it only hummed, steady as a heartbeat. Down the trail, the quiet was broken by something less steady. The crunch of boots dragging through snow, the ragged rhythm of breath and desperation. A young man staggered into view, bent beneath the weight of a blanket-covered figure slumped against his shoulder. His coat was torn, his hat lost to the wind, his eyes hollow from exhaustion. He stumbled once, caught himself on a branch, and kept moving. Behind him, the woman he carried murmured something that sounded like a prayer, or a goodbye. Elias set down the axe, the blade sinking into the stump, and watched them. He had seen travelers before, but not in storms like this. Not this far from the road. He stayed still, letting the cold bite him, until the young man's boots slipped again, and both bodies went down into the drift. The sound was soft, almost tender, like snow catching a breath. By the time Elias reached them, the man was on his knees, trying to lift her. "Please," he gasped, voice raw. "Please, she's cold." Elias crouched and touched the woman's face. Her skin was white as porcelain, lips blue, lashes dusted with frost. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only proof she was alive. He didn't ask who they were or what they wanted. He simply lifted her into his arms as if she weighed no more than a child. The young man, panting, tried to protest, but his strength broke mid-sentence. Inside, the cabin's warmth hit them like sunlight. Elias laid the woman near the fire, pulled down a quilt, and poured water from the kettle into a tin cup. Steam rose and fogged the air between them. The man sank onto the floor, shoulders shaking, half in gratitude, half in shame. "Jonas Clay," he said at last, voice cracking. "My wife, Lila. We couldn't make it to town. Horse broke her leg in the ravine." Elias nodded once. "You'll stay here tonight?" His voice was deep, smooth as dark stone, unhurried. When he spoke, the air seemed to slow to listen. Jonas looked at him properly for the first time, eyes widening. The old man's body was corded with muscle, scars pale against bronze skin. The long braid of white hair brushed his shoulder, and though his expression held no threat, there was something unmovable about him, like mountain rock refusing weather. "Thank you, sir," Jonas murmured, unsure. His gaze flicked to the tomahawk on the table, to the strange beadwork above the door. "We don't mean to trouble." Elias turned back to the fire. "You already did," he said simply, then handed him a wooden bowl of stew. Lila stirred at the smell. Her eyes opened, dazed and unfocused. They were the kind of blue found only in winter, fragile, too pure for warmth. "Where are we?" she whispered. "In my home," Elias said. "You'll rest." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. The way someone stares at an unexpected kindness they're afraid to believe in. When he turned away to fetch more wood, she watched his bare back, steam rising like ghostly smoke from his skin. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Jonas took her hand and whispered something Elias didn't hear. Then, softly, the sound of her breathing deepened. Sleep reclaimed her. The night grew thick. The storm outside tightened its grip, the wind clawing at the cabin walls, but inside, firelight wrapped everything in slow amber rhythm. Elias sat across from the young man, watching the flames eat through a log. He could feel Jonas's unease pulsing like heat from the stove. "You're far from home," Elias said. Jonas nodded, staring into the fire. "We were looking for work. Thought there might be a ranch still hiring hands before the winter shut in. But the town—" He stopped, swallowed. "They wouldn't rent to us." Elias tilted his head. "Why?" Jonas hesitated. "My wife, she used to sing at the saloon. Folks don't forget what they think they know." Elias let the words rest. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't need to. Silence between men like these was its own mercy. Lila shifted in her sleep, murmuring a tune that trembled like glass. Elias recognized the rhythm. It was a lullaby, the same melody his mother used to hum when winter storms prowled across the plains. He looked away, throat tight. The years had buried too many sounds like that. He stood and opened the door just enough to look outside. The world beyond was white, endless. No tracks let in, no stars let out. Only the storm. He shut it again, careful not to wake her. Behind him, Jonas spoke suddenly. "They say you killed 6 men," he blurted, then flinched as if afraid of the words. Elias didn't answer at once. The fire crackled softly, throwing shadows that reached like old ghosts up the wall. "They say many things," he said finally. "It helps them sleep." Jonas looked down, ashamed. "I didn't mean." "You did," Elias said, without anger. "And now you see it's only wind." The younger man fell silent. Somewhere outside, a wolf howled, low and distant. Elias moved to the corner, pulled on a loose flannel shirt, and began mending a broken strap from their pack. His hands were slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that came from years of knowing there was no hurry left in the world. Jonas watched him, something shifting behind his tired eyes. Respect, maybe, or the slow dissolving of fear. "You live alone out here?" he asked after a long while. "I did," Elias said. "Until tonight." Jonas opened his mouth to reply, but the words caught on his breath. He turned back to the fire instead, eyes wet from smoke or memory. Hours passed. The storm outside howled like a grieving choir. Inside, the air grew warm and heavy, filled with the steady cadence of life returning. Lila's face flushed back to color. The knot in Elias's chest eased without permission. When the flames burned low, he rose, stepped outside into the night. Snow buried his boots. The moon hung thin as a blade. He looked down the valley toward the faint lights of the town, small, cold, far away. He wondered if they'd seen the smoke and begun to whisper. They always did. Behind him, Lila's voice, faint as a sigh. "You're kind." He turned. She was awake again, watching him from the doorway, blanket around her shoulders, hair silvered by moonlight. For a moment, she looked like a vision half remembered. "I ain't," he said quietly. "Just don't turn away folks in storms." She smiled, barely. "Then maybe that's what kind is." The wind carried her words into the darkness like sparks. Elias looked away, heart beating slower than before. Something in him, something long buried under years of silence, shifted. Then, from far down the slope, came the sharp echo of hooves cutting through snow. Distant, deliberate. Riders, heading their way. Elias's breath clouded in the air. He stepped down from the porch, eyes narrowing toward the sound. The snow swallowed the rest of the valley, but he could feel them. Men from town, drawn by rumor, coming through the cold. Behind him, the firelight flickered across Lila's face as she whispered to her sleeping husband. Inside the cabin, warmth. Beyond it, judgment approaching like a storm's second wave. Elias closed the door softly and stood with his hand on the latch, staring into the night until the hoofbeats faded to nothing but the sound of his own pulse. And yet in that silence he knew. Nothing about this winter would stay quiet for long. Morning came white and merciless. The storm had passed, but the air still bit at the skin, and the trees stood glazed in ice, their branches heavy with silence. Smoke rose from Elias Greyhawk's chimney, a thin, wavering column against the pewter sky, and that alone was enough to stir the valley's tongue. By noon, Martha Lane at the general store had seen it from her porch, and was already telling it wrong. "He's got company," she whispered, eyes narrow with curiosity. "A woman, too. Pretty one. I saw her hand a cup through the door." By evening, the story had grown its own legs. The widow at the post office swore she'd seen 2 strangers dragged inside at gunpoint. A stable boy claimed the old Apache had taken himself a bride. The town fed on the lie like wolves circling meat. Elias didn't know yet. He was outside splitting wood, his breath puffing like smoke, while Jonas Clay worked beside him, still too grateful to speak much. The young man's movements were clumsy but sincere, his palms raw against the axe handle. Inside the cabin, Lila stirred stew over the fire, pale but recovering. Every now and then she touched the wall as if steadying herself against the weight of the world. When Elias came in, the warmth rippled with the scent of sage and smoke. He handed Lila a new log for the hearth, and she thanked him with a nod that carried more emotion than words could bear. Jonas sat at the table, silent for a long while before muttering, "You didn't have to take us in. Not when folks talk like they do." Elias looked up, face unreadable. "You hungry or worried about words?" Jonas smiled faintly, the first time he'd smiled in days. "Guess both." "Then eat," Elias said. Outside, the snow squeaked under boots. A shadow crossed the window. The door opened without a knock, and a gust of cold spilled in along with Sheriff Abel Marin. He was a broad man gone soft with years of power, his coat lined with fur, his eyes small and sharp. "Heard you've got guests," he said. Elias didn't turn from the fire. They were freezing. The sheriff stepped inside, gaze sweeping over the young couple, then back to Elias. "You know the town don't take kindly to this." "To kindness?" Elias asked. "To charity," Marin said evenly. "Especially when it looks mixed." His eyes flicked toward Lila, then away, careful but cruel. Jonas stiffened. "We're not looking for trouble, sir. We'll leave come morning." "You'll leave now," the sheriff replied. Elias straightened, the movement unhurried but commanding. "They stay till the woman's strong enough to walk. Winter don't wait for men's opinions." The sheriff's jaw clenched. "Careful, Greyhawk. You start bending rules, people remember why they feared you." Elias stepped closer, his presence filling the small cabin. The sheriff took one backward step despite himself. "I never asked to be feared," Elias said softly. "But I won't be told when to show mercy." Marin's hand brushed the butt of his revolver, then fell away. He muttered something about savages playing saints, and backed out into the cold. The door shut, leaving behind a ringing silence. Lila sank onto the chair, trembling. "He'll tell them worse now," she said. "He'll say things that'll stick." Elias met her eyes. "Let him. Snow covers everything eventually." But he felt the old ache deep in his chest, the ache of knowing snow melts, and people never forget what they think they saw. That afternoon, Jonas tried to mend the broken wagon out back, but the axles were frozen solid. Elias joined him without word. Together they worked until dusk, until their hands burned from cold and effort. When Jonas looked up, the cabin windows glowed golden behind the veil of falling snow. Inside that light, Lila moved slowly, hair glinting copper near the fire, humming softly to herself. For a moment, Jonas's breath caught. For the first time since the journey began, she looked alive again. "Your wife is brave," Elias said quietly. Jonas glanced at him. "She's been through worse. Folks treat her like she's dirt for the life she had before. Singing don't make a sinner, but try telling them that." Elias nodded, eyes on the horizon. "They only need one reason to draw a line. After that, they don't look for truth. Just ways to stay on the clean side of it." Jonas didn't answer, but something softened in his expression. He saw now what the town refused to. Elias wasn't the monster they whispered about. He was a man tired of surviving people's hatred, and still refusing to give it back. That night, Lila set the table for 3. They ate in quiet harmony broken only by the wind moaning through the chimney. Afterward, she sat near the fire, mending a tear in Elias's old blanket. Her fingers trembled, but she kept at it. "I used to sew dresses for women who'd cross the street when I passed," she murmured. "Funny how kindness feels heavier to carry than shame." Elias paused in sharpening his knife. "Shame's something given. You can hand it back whenever you choose." Her eyes glistened, reflecting the fire. "And what if no one takes it back?" "Then let it burn," he said, and turned the knife edge toward the flame until it glowed red. Jonas watched them, something unspoken passing between the old man and his wife that he couldn't name but felt deeply. The storm outside returned with new fury, rattling the roof, making the world sound like a restless beast. In town, Martha Lane's lantern burned late. She told the crowd at the store how the white-haired savage had bewitched a young woman, how the sheriff might have to rescue her proper. Laughter, sharp as glass, filled the room. The words carried through the night, thin and poisonous, riding the same wind that beat against Elias's cabin. Back inside, Elias stepped to the window, his breath frosting the glass. He could see faint torchlight far off in the valley, riders moving slow, deliberate. The same kind of slow that came before violence. He knew that rhythm well. Jonas joined him, following his gaze. "They're coming." Elias nodded. "Maybe not tonight. But soon." "What will we do?" Jonas asked. Elias didn't look away from the lights. "We'll stay warm." He turned, walked to the hearth, and tossed another log into the fire. Sparks leapt upward, swirling like tiny stars before vanishing into smoke. Lila, half asleep by the embers, stirred at the noise. Her hand slipped over her stomach unconsciously, a small, protective gesture, and in that moment Elias noticed what Jonas hadn't yet spoken of. She was carrying life inside her. He froze, eyes narrowing slightly, then softened. The fire cracked, echoing the secret. Outside, wind roared over the roof, dragging loose snow into ghost-like curls. Elias said nothing. Some truths had to wait for their time, like seeds beneath frost. The storm eased to a whisper, leaving the world hushed and breathless. In the cabin, the three slept in uneasy peace. Miles away, the sheriff's men saddled their horses under a hard, moonless sky. The first rumors had burned bright. Now they were turning to ash, and ashes, Elias knew, could still start fire when stirred. The storm returned with a vengeance that night, thick as smoke and twice as cruel. The wind screamed against the cabin walls, carrying voices that sounded almost human, whispers of judgment and the rattle of unseen hands. Elias Greyhawk fed the fire until it burned high and bright, the only light for miles. Each flame cast shadows that seemed to breathe, flickering across the faces of the three souls trapped inside. Lila lay on the cot, fever-slick and restless. Her skin glowed pale under the firelight, and strands of her hair stuck to her forehead. Jonas sat beside her, holding her hand with a helpless tenderness that made his youth show more sharply. He'd taken off his coat and draped it over her, but the cold still seeped through the floorboards. Outside, the world howled and buried itself deeper under snow. Elias watched the storm through the small window. The glass trembled with each gust, the wind howling like something that remembered his name. His breath fogged the pain, and through it, he thought he saw faint flickers, torches moving far off in the valley, like stars crawling up from hell. The sheriff's riders. He didn't tell Jonas. Not yet. "She's burning up," Jonas said, voice cracking. I don't know what to do." Elias turned from the window, walked to the hearth, and poured water into the blackened pot. The heat hissed when it touched the metal. "You keep her cool," he said, his tone soft but steady. "Don't fight the fever. Let her sweat it out." Jonas nodded, face drawn tight with fear. "You sound like you've done this before." "I have," Elias said, crouching to stir the pot. His eyes flickered with a memory he didn't share. Another woman, another winter, a fever that took what even war had spared. He'd buried her before the thaw, the earth still frozen around her name. Lila moaned softly. Her lips moved without sound, a ghost of prayer. Jonas brushed her cheek with shaking fingers. "She don't deserve this," he whispered. "None of it. Not what they said, not what she suffered." Elias set down the spoon. "No one does. But life don't ask what we deserve. Only what we can carry." Jonas looked up, eyes glistening. "You ever get tired of carrying it?" Elias smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Every day. But if I set it down, someone else picks it up heavier." The fire popped, throwing sparks across the floor like scattered stars. The warmth licked their faces, but the cold had sunk deeper, the kind that lived in bones and memories. Jonas rose and began pacing, unable to sit still. "You think they'll come?" he asked finally. Elias glanced toward the window again. "They're already on their way." Jonas froze. "You're sure?" Elias nodded once. Men like Marin don't sleep easy when there's peace he didn't make himself. Jonas clenched his fists. Then we should go. Take her and leave before they get here. Go where? Elias asked. Snow's chest high. The horses are dead. You'd freeze before sunrise. Jonas's breath came fast. He looked like a boy caught between fight and flight, torn by the instinct to protect and the fear of failing. Then we can't just wait, he said. Elias picked up another log and laid it across the fire, the light flashing against the deep scars across his arms. We don't wait, he said. We endure. Hours passed, the storm tightening around the cabin until the world outside vanished. Inside, time slowed. The only sounds were the crackle of fire, the rattle of wind, and Lila's uneven breathing. Elias brewed willow bark tea and pressed it to her lips. She swallowed weakly, eyes fluttering open for the first time in hours. Her gaze met his, sharp, fragile, questioning. Am I dying? She whispered. Not tonight, he said. Her eyes drifted toward Jonas, then back to Elias. You don't hate me, she murmured. Elias frowned. Why would I? She smiled faintly, a curve of exhaustion. Because the town does. Because I'm not clean. The words struck something raw in him. He set the cup down slowly, meeting her gaze with a stillness that carried the weight of years. Snow don't care what dirt it falls on. It still shines when the moon touches it. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, her breath steadied. Then tears welled and slipped silently down her cheeks. Jonas reached for her, but Elias turned away, giving them the dignity of privacy. He stepped outside into the teeth of the wind. Snow battered his face, and the world blurred into gray. He scanned the valley again. Nothing visible but the storm's wild dance. Still, he felt them near. Men wrapped in furs and pride, torches raised against the darkness. He could almost hear their voices, muttering about justice, about purity, about fear dressed up as law. When he came back in, Jonas was stoking the fire, face streaked with sweat and worry. She's breathing easier, the young man said, his voice trembling with cautious hope. Elias nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from him. The heat from the fire painted their faces in gold and shadow. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Jonas whispered, I was wrong about you. Elias raised an eyebrow. About what? About everything, Jonas said. The stories. The way folks talk. They made you sound like a monster. Elias stared into the flames. Monsters are useful, he said after a moment. They remind people what they're not, until they need saving, and then they forget. Jonas shook his head. If they come, I won't let them touch her. Elias looked up. You can't fight a storm with fists. Jonas swallowed. Then how do you fight it? Elias leaned forward, eyes steady. By standing still in it. By not becoming what's outside. The words hung between them, warm and heavy. Jonas exhaled, some of the panic leaving his face. He stared into the fire as if it might explain things the world never had. Lila stirred again. Elias moved to check her pulse, gentle as a father might be. Her skin was warm now, not burning. Her fever was breaking. He covered her with a clean blanket, one embroidered long ago by a hand he still remembered. She'll see morning, he said quietly. Jonas's shoulders sagged with relief. You saved her. Elias shook his head. The fire did. Outside, the storm began to shift. The howling softened, turning to the slow breath of wind over snow. But beneath it came another sound, distant, rhythmic. Hoofbeats. Jonas heard it too. He moved toward the door, but Elias stopped him with a hand on his arm. Not yet, he said. Let them find cold, not fear. He opened the door himself. The wind pushed in, sharp and cold, scattering sparks across the floor. Through the swirl of snow, faint lanterns glowed in the distance. The posse, drawing closer. Elias watched them a moment, then shut the door gently. They'll reach the clearing by dawn. Jonas's jaw tightened. Then what? Elias met his eyes, calm as stone. Then we see if men remember what mercy looks like. Lila murmured something behind them, and Jonas turned back to her. Elias stayed by the door, listening to the storm's dying breath. The fire crackled, each pop sounding like a heartbeat. He felt something shift in him. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of quiet readiness. The kind that comes when a man has already lost everything once, and knows he can bear it again. When he finally sat, the room was bathed in gold, the air warm with smoke and sweat, and the faint sweetness of survival. Jonas knelt by his wife, whispering prayers. Lila's hand, weak but steady, found his cheek. Her eyes fluttered open and met Elias's. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. "Rest. The storm's near done." She smiled faintly. "Not outside," she said, voice barely there. "I meant the one in you." Elias froze. Something deep within him, a memory, a grief, an ember, flared. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the window. The torches were closer now, their light flickering like judgment through the snow. He could see the sheriff's outline at the front, coat flapping in the wind. Behind him, rifles gleamed. Elias breathed in the smell of wood smoke, sweat, and fear, and smiled, small and tired. The fire roared higher, reflecting in his eyes like dawn breaking. They were coming through the cold, and he was ready to meet them in the light. Dawn came slow, bruised and red. The storm had broken, leaving the world glazed in ice and silence. The valley lay buried under a smooth white sheet that caught the first light like a mirror, and every sound seemed hesitant to return. Elias Greyhawk stood outside the cabin, bare-chested in the cold, his breath rising in quiet plumes. He had slept none. Behind him, the fire still burned, and inside it, life stirred. Jonas Clay stepped out, coat half-buttoned, eyes hollow but awake. The night had carved something older into him. "They're close," he said softly. Elias nodded. From the ridge came the faint crunch of hooves, measured, certain, cruelly deliberate. Torches flickered between the trees, fire against frost. The posse had arrived. Sheriff Abel Marin led them, his fur-lined coat bright against the pallid morning. Behind him rode half the town, bound by fear disguised as righteousness. Elias didn't move. He stood rooted, the snow whispering under his feet. Jonas swallowed hard. "Let me talk to them." "You'll waste your breath," Elias said quietly. "Men don't listen once they've chosen who's guilty." Lila's voice floated from inside, weak but steady. "Please, don't let them hurt each other." She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a wool blanket, her face pale but luminous in the cold light. Jonas turned, the sight of her steadying his trembling hands. He looked back toward the oncoming riders. "Then I'll stand beside you." Elias glanced at him once, something like pride flickering in his eyes. "Then stand tall." The riders drew near, their horses snorting clouds into the icy air. Sheriff Marin raised a hand, signaling halt. His voice cut the quiet like a blade. "Greyhawk, step aside. You're harboring what ain't yours to keep." Elias didn't answer. His silence unnerved them more than a shout might have. Marin shifted in his saddle. "The woman goes back to town. The man can come or stay. You, Apache, you'll answer for whatever devil you've stirred here." Jonas stepped forward, breath shaking. "She's sick, Sheriff. You'd have left her to die." "That's not your decision, boy," Marin barked. "It's mine now," Jonas said, louder this time. "Because I owe him my wife's life. You'd do the same if you had a soul left to listen." A murmur rippled through the posse, hesitation, thin as smoke. Marin sneered. "You calling me heartless?" Elias finally spoke. "You're calling yourself that," he said. Every eye turned to him. He stood against the pale sun like something carved from the land itself, white hair blowing, skin bronze and scarred, body steaming faintly against the cold. There was no weapon in his hand, only the calm of a man who had already survived every kind of storm. Marin dismounted, snow crunching under his boots. "You think your quiet makes you noble?" Elias met his gaze. "No. It just makes me done explaining." The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver. The townsmen watched, breath misting, waiting for the spark. From the cabin came a soft cry, Lila's voice breaking the air. Elias turned instantly. She had collapsed against the doorframe, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, revealing her rounded belly beneath the loose shirt. The gasp that went through the crowd was sharp as wind. "She's with child," someone whispered. Elias moved to her, caught her before she fell. Jonas was beside them in an instant, his hands trembling against her face. "Stay with me," he begged. Maren hesitated, gun still half raised. The humanity in the scene, the fear, the tenderness, unraveled something in him. "She's pregnant?" he asked, his voice smaller now. Elias looked up, eyes hard. "And you'd have her freeze for your peace of mind?" The question hung there like smoke. No one answered. Jonas gathered Lila into his arms, her head resting against his chest. "She needs the doctor," he said. "Please." No one moved. Then Elias did the unthinkable. He stepped forward, scooping her up into his own arms, the way a man carries something sacred. His skin shone in the morning light, every muscle tight with strength and resolve. The townsmen parted without meaning to, the snow crunching under his heavy strides as he walked straight past them. Shirtless, barefoot, carrying the fevered woman as if she weighed nothing. Jonas followed, stumbling beside him. The sheriff stood frozen, his authority melting away under the raw sight of it. Not defiance, something purer. Grace. They reached the doctor's porch in silence. Elias laid her down on the bench, covering her with his coat. Steam rose from his skin, blending with the mist around him. The doctor, pale and startled, came rushing out. "Inside," he said quickly. "Now." Jonas obeyed, helping carry her in. Elias stood outside, snow melting on his shoulders, the door closing softly behind them. The crowd that had followed stopped several paces back, uncertain. Maren's voice, quieter now, broke the silence. "Why'd you do it, Greyhawk? She ain't your kin. Not your fight." Elias turned, eyes calm, voice low. "Because Mercy's nobody's property." The words struck deeper than he meant them to. The sheriff took off his hat, staring at the ground. One by one, the men behind him looked away. The torches guttered in the soft wind, their fire paling in daylight. When Jonas came back out hours later, the doctor followed with a tired smile. "She'll live," the doctor said. "Both of them will." Jonas looked at Elias, voice thick. "She asked for you." Elias shook his head. "She don't owe me a word. Go be with her." Jonas hesitated, then reached out, gripping the older man's arm. "You saved more than her life today." Elias didn't answer. He watched the young man walk back inside, the door closing once more between two worlds, one healing, one remembering. By sunset, the crowd had dispersed. The sheriff approached slowly, boots crunching in the snow. "Town owes you an apology," he muttered. Elias shook his head. "Town owes itself one." Maren gave a quiet nod, turned and left. When the last of them was gone, Elias sat on the porch rail, the world finally still. The sky was streaked in pink and silver, and smoke curled from chimneys across the valley, his own among them. For the first time in years, he saw it not as a warning, but as proof of life. He thought of Lila's faint smile, Jonas's trembling gratitude, the sheriff lowering his gun. The world had changed by inches, but inches were how the thaw began. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and smoke. Somewhere behind the cabin, a new sound stirred, the faint wail of a newborn cry. It sliced through the evening with such purity that Elias's heart clenched. He smiled, slow and quiet, the way a man smiles when he finally believes the winter might end. The valley glowed in the dying light, and for the first time in a long while, the people who'd feared the old Apache spoke of him not as a monster, but as a man who had carried light through the storm. Elias stood, lifting his face to the fading sun. The snow around his feet shimmered gold. "Funny," he murmured to the wind, "how sometimes the coldest hearts thaw from watching another man burn." And the last warmth of the day clung to his skin as the world went still, the mountains holding its breath, bearing witness to mercy.